Hello, everyone. Happy Monday. I realize I always start these off by singing, which is so funny because I pretty much only sing by myself around the house. So you guys get just a little bit of singing from me when I start these off. Uh, Check in with me today. Let me know where you are joining me from. As it says on the bottom of the screen, my name is Deborah Lee Smith. I am an actor, a filmmaker, and a mental health advocate, and I have a nonprofit organization called More Than You See, where I share non-traditional mental health resources with my community. And I love coming on here and chatting with you all. So I'm very excited for everyone to join me today. So yeah, let me know where you are joining me from. Yes, there's the link to my mental health organization. If you go to the link right now, actually, I have a landing page up with our subscription for the newsletter that I'm starting. And so that's like a really great place to just kind of check in with what's going on. I also have a mental health podcast that comes out every Mondays. And so more information on the podcast will also be released on that little newsletter. Hello from Massachusetts. Hello from Nebraska. Hello, Kia Or. Where is that? That sounds so exotic. I want to go there. Or is that a hello in another language? Either way, I am here for it. New Brunswick. Hi, Jessica. Hello, Elk in California. I am also in California. I am in Los Angeles. Hi, Danielle from New York. Thank you everyone so much for joining me today. We're going to be talking about triggers. Yay, fun times. Hi Dale from London again, and Seamus from Ireland. So wonderful to see everyone today, and South Africa. Great. So as I mentioned before, welcome. My name is Deborah Lee Smith. I lead these conversations every other Monday right here on The Mighty, and I absolutely love having conversations with you all. I also have a mental health podcast called More Than You See, and a mental health organization called More Than You See. Same. And on both the podcast and the website, I discuss non-traditional mental health resources. And what that means is that I think that there's, of course, a lot of very standard things that need to be done in order to take care of your mental health, like meditation, seeking out help with a therapist or a psychiatrist, as well as meditation, medication, all the M's. But I think that there's also some like other resources that can also really help someone who is struggling. I know that for myself personally, the things that have helped me have been listening to podcasts, listening to TED Talks, listening to or reading different articles about how my brain works and how my brain chemicals are reacting to everything else in my body. So I really try to dive into all of those kind of resources on my mental health podcast and my website, because I think that it is really important. Brett says actually finding the root of the problem. Absolutely. I mean, that's definitely something that I certainly discuss on my podcast and on our Instagram and on the mental health website. I just think that it's really important to look at mental health as a multi-pronged approach and really look at it in a very holistic way, because I don't think that it's just one thing that affects your mental health. I think that there's a lot of things that affect your mental health. And so I like to come on here and talk about them with you all. So I'm really excited to be joining you again today. Hello, Ted. I see you from New York. Thank you for joining. Ted is one of my regulars As I said, I do this every other Monday. So today is April 5th, which means my next mental health podcast will be April 19th. And I am really, I just love these conversations. As I was saying to someone from the Mighty who is running everything behind the scenes here, I had a little bit of a kind of icky weekend. And so it was really so exciting for me to come on here and have this community to check in with today, because you guys really make me happy, and I just love having conversations with you all. So hello, Sarah, first time viewer. Again, thank you so much for joining me. As I said, so I'm going to be talking about triggers today. If you've never been with me before, the way that I kind of run these conversations is I've researched a topic before I come here, and then I talk about my own experience with something, and then I also will bring in outside resources that I've looked up, or different, ideas that I've looked up that might help clarify my points on things. But then I also very much rely on you all to have a conversation with as well. So I can see your comments. So if you have any input, if you want to share a personal story when it comes to whatever I'm discussing, I would absolutely love to have you a part of the conversation. And again, final time I will say this for the next 10 minutes anyways, I am an actor and a producer and a mental health advocate, and I have a mental health organization called More Than You See, where I focus on non-traditional mental health resources. And so I'm not a therapist. I am not a doctor. I am just really interested and involved in my own mental health. And I think that it's really important to have a shared experience when it comes to mental health. And that's why I'm here. And that's why the Mighty is here. And I'm really excited that you're here as well. Okay, so let's talk about triggers. So I think that one of the things, first of all, I'll say the reason that I brought this up and the reason why I really wanted to talk about triggers today was because we just passed another holiday weekend. It was obviously Easter last weekend. Whether or not you celebrate Easter, I don't personally celebrate Easter. I'm Jewish, so that's not a specific holiday for me. But of course, I'm still very aware of the holiday. I'm very aware that it is such an important part of society in so many ways. And I think that even outside of the religion aspect, there's still this idea of like getting together with family, getting together with friends. And of course, that looks a lot different this year. Even though here in the US, we are doing really, really well with vaccinations. I've had my second vaccine, and so I am on my way to feeling more comfortable to go outside, which I'm very, very excited about. But I'm still, for the most part, self-isolating and following the guidelines to make myself and other people safe. And so this weekend was really a trigger for a few different reasons for myself. So number one, if you've never been with me before, hi Danielle, first time viewer as well. I live alone. I have a dog who might make an appearance at some point. He's just sitting down here at my feet, and sometimes he likes to say hello. So I live by myself in Los Angeles, and so that has been a huge part of my own dealing with everything this year when it comes to mental health and the pandemic. But I also have some personal history things related to the Easter holiday season. There's some very traumatic events that have happened in my personal life around this time. And so this weekend I felt very triggered, and I felt really just sad and depressed. And it was, to be honest, I'm still feeling that way right now. It took a lot to get ready for this talk today, but I always love coming on here and talking with you guys, even if I'm not feeling my best. And I've got my Wonder Woman coffee mug here to like give me some extra like good juju. And I just always appreciate you guys, being here to like help me process things the way that I'm helping you process things. So Ted says that I have a difficult time with family events. I'm glad I have boundaries and keep it to small gatherings. Your family of 4 is just perfect. That's awesome, Ted. I mean, my mental health podcast episode that came out last week was about the world opening up and all of the anxiety and trauma and depression difficulties, just like ideas that were happening around the world opening up. And one of the things that I talk about a lot in that podcast episode is the importance of setting boundaries for yourself and for others, and the fact that just because you potentially said yes to someone, you said that you were comfortable hanging out with someone, and then you decide that you're not because suddenly that situation seems overwhelming and is not something you actually want to do, that's perfectly okay. I think that it's really important right now, I mean always, but especially right now, to have real autonomy and advocacy of our own mental health and our own physical health, because we need to look out for ourselves. And of course, the idea of like social distancing, wearing masks, like we have been protecting our community and others from the potential of getting other people sick. But I think that right now, as we start to open up to the world, is also really, really important to check in with yourself and notice how you're feeling around things. And if you're feeling not good in a situation, that it's okay to set extra boundaries, even maybe more boundaries that you would have set pre-COVID. Oh, there's my dog escaping the room. But yeah, so I think that it's really important to pay attention to those things, and to also pay attention to the fact that this, you might feel okay the first couple times you go out and see friends, and then you might feel triggered or feel like you need to put up more boundaries in the future. And that's also perfectly okay. I think, I've got a comment over here from Nabila. I hope that I'm not saying your name incorrectly, but does coffee trigger more? I mean, potentially, but this is something that I will say to that, and thank you for bringing that up. Our bodies and our mental health are so individual. And I think that that is something that is super, super important to recognize, is the way that your body processes something may be completely different than the way that someone else's body processes something. For me, coffee is like awesome. I don't know how else to say it. For me, coffee is like one of my things that I need daily, and it doesn't, I don't have any adverse reactions to coffee. So for me, this is actually just like a warm cup of happy goodness. But again, that's for me personally. So Brett has a really wonderful paragraph here that I would love to read. So he says, a lot of people don't know that high stress anxiety can lead to hormonal imbalances in women and men, as well as most medications. They cause low testosterone in men, and women cause depression, anxiety. Just sharing, you had to deal with panic, social anxiety along with MDD. Recently found out that hormonal fluctuations causing fight, flight might be the trigger for the anxiety and depression. Oh man, Brett, you are speaking my language. Oh man, I love this so much. Okay. Yes. Something that I talk about, I think, Brett, you said that you're a first-time viewer as well. Something that I talk about all the time on these conversations, as well as I had a whole section on it on my mental health podcast, is the idea that your mental health is comprised of 4 different elements. And those elements are your spirituality, and that's like your sense of community, what you think about the greater world, anything related to that. It does not have to do with religion. It has to do with just like your place in the greater ether. And then your environment, and that includes your social and your physical environment. Again, it has to do with how your room actually looks. Do you have the correct amount of light in your space to like make you happy? Do plants, bring you happiness? Like any of those sorts of things, as well as the people that you surround yourself with, and how how those social aspects can also impact your mental health. And then we've got your physiology, which has to do with how you talk about yourself, and that often, and both how you talk about yourself, but also how you, like, if you're in a situation, how you immediately react to something based on that situation. That has to do with your physiology. And sometimes, like, a really great example that I have of this is the fact that if you walk by yourself in a mirror and you look at yourself in the mirror and you automatically think, like, oh man, I look fat today, or I look whatever negative, thinking that you have, that is often related to your physiology, and it has to do with often your parents, but also greater society, and basically the like nature versus nurture, how we think about ourselves and how we talk to ourselves. And so that's a really key part of mental health. And then our fourth thing is our brain chemistry, and again, this has to do with how you relate to the world, how the world relates to you, but how it specifically relates to your testosterone, to your hormones, to the level of chemicals in your brain, and how that reacts to your current environment. So I think that it's I love that. Thank you for sharing that, Brett, because I think that it's so important for us to identify the fact that, yeah, for some people, their cortisol levels, which is their stress hormone, might spike much quicker than someone who does not have an excess of cortisol in their system or whatever. Like, there's so many different aspects to the brain chemistry side of our mental health. And I think another thing that's really key to understand is the fact that that is the only part of our mental health that we can easily track, and that can be easily kind of I don't know, kind of controlled. Like, that's the one piece that doctors often understand, because it can be measured. Like, your brain can actually be, your brain levels, your hormones, all of those sorts of things can actually be measured. And so I think that it's really key to remember that that is only one aspect of your mental health, that there's all of these other aspects that also impact how you're feeling in a given situation on a given day, etc. And so it's really key to address all of those things. But thank you so much, Brett, for bringing that up. So Jack says, my hubby has to have testosterone replacement gel. He doesn't have any in his body at all. It has been attributed to his meds. Interesting. I mean, this is the thing, is like, again, so like the way that our bodies react to different things is so individual, and that's why it's so key to advocate for your own mental health and physical health. And if you, in one of my in one of my previous podcasts, I talk about brain chemistry, and I talk about chemicals and taking medication and all those things. And the one thing that I say is, it's so important, if you are on a prescription for something and it is not making you feel good, of course it is so important to like actually give it a good shot, and not just like, take it for a week and then say like, oh, this isn't working for me, etc. Unless you're having a strong adverse reaction, obviously, like, you never put yourself in danger, but it is important to allow your chemicals to kind of regulate itself. But if you are on a medication and you are on it for months and it's still not making you feel good, it's so important to talk to someone and be like, hey, this isn't working for me. I need to try something else. That's super, super important. So thank you for bringing that up. And Brett says, thanks for reading. I completely agree. Routines or bad habits, some of the reactions to social interactions. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I talk about habits all the time. I think that habits are I mean, they're good and bad. They can be good things, they can be bad things. But the key thing is that the reason that habits exist and the reason that our brains automatically go to habitual actions is because even though our brain takes up a very small percentage of our body mass, they take up over 25% of the energy that we expel during the day. So both oxygen as well as food, any of those sorts of things, like our brain really takes a lot in order to function. And so whenever our brain is in a current situation that they already know how to do something, like for example, if you come home and every time you come home, you follow the same routine, like you go to the fridge, you get a soda, you get a bag of chips, you sit on the couch, you watch TV, even though that may not be the best like routine for you to do, the fact that you've been doing it every day for a prolonged period of time, your brain automatically goes, yep, I'm just going to do the same thing I've always done, because it doesn't require any thought. It doesn't require any decision making to happen. Your brain just goes, this is the thing I've always done, so this is what I'm going to do. And that's why it's so important. There's so many different reasons for or different ideas around how to build habits and all of that sort of stuff. And I don't necessarily prescribe to a specific way. And again, I'm not a doctor or anything. I just share what I know or share what I've learned. And I think the one underlying thing with all of this is the importance of small, tiny changes in your body and in your day in order to make greater change. And so that's where like habits are concerned as well, just to make tiny little changes. And that makes it so that your brain doesn't completely freak out going like, what are you doing? Like, why are you changing your entire day? You just have to change tiny little things in order to like build, better habits. I think that's really important. So Santiago brings us back to what I wanted to talk about today. Originally, where he says, hello, Santiago from Argentina. Nice to see you. First time. Easter Sunday, depression finally caught you again. So Santiago, I think you may have missed this, but what I said in the beginning is this is exactly what I wanted to talk about today, because I as well, like this weekend was really tough for me. And I want to talk about why that is and what we can do about it, and specifically along the line of triggers. So let's talk about triggers. So there's a difference. I think that oftentimes we think about triggers and trauma interchangeably. We think about the idea that like, triggers are the same thing as reacting to trauma or responding to trauma or remembering trauma. Like PTSD is obviously a reaction to extreme trauma, and that is a kind of trigger. But I think that it's also really important to acknowledge the fact that triggers can be anything, and they don't have to be it doesn't have to be that like have had a bad car crash in the past, and when you have another car crash, that's a trigger to remember the trauma from your past. That is a very huge example of a trigger that is reminding you of trauma. Triggers can also be mundane and make absolutely no real sense to anyone else or even to yourself sometimes. And that's the first thing that I want to kind of like mention and pay attention to, is that your trigger could be completely individual, but it also could be it could be something that someone else understood. But either way, it doesn't really matter. I think that it's just super important to remember that whatever you are feeling is valid, period. However, your reaction to something is a valid reaction, and you as an individual are allowed to react to that situation in that specific way. That's the first thing that I will say when it comes to triggers. I'm going to drink some water real quick. I think that, for me, as I was mentioning earlier, I had a pretty strong series of triggers this weekend that kind of led to my feeling depressed. I do have some pretty substantial historical trauma in my past around this time period of the year that kind of led to it, but it definitely was something that was, there definitely wasn't any reason. Well, I don't know. I'm thinking as I'm speaking. I mean, I will say that I think that just being alone on Easter, even though I don't celebrate Easter, but being alone, seeing on social media people with their families, people with partners, that certainly was something that did trigger me. But it was something specific. There was an item that I found in my house that I just picked up, and it reminded me of something that I hadn't thought about in quite some time. And that kind of led me down a, just a path of not feeling great and feeling kind of depressed and pretty shitty. And so I think that it's really important to address the fact that I was already kind of in a feeling of just not feeling 100%. And then there was one thing that kind of triggered all of this reaction, this kind of waterfall of excess depression and just not feeling good. And so then I did several things in order to make space for myself in that depressive state and allow that to happen. But I also wanted to make sure that I was being safe and taking care of myself and allowing myself to work through it in a positive and constructive way. And so we're going to talk about what I did and maybe what you guys do as well. Because again, this is a two-way conversation here. So I'm going to address some people's conversations here, or comments here. So first of all, Brittany, thank you so much for joining. I am really honored that you are spending your time with us, and thank you so much for being so vulnerable and for speaking about your experience. I really am very, very proud of you and glad that you were here with us. And if you want to, please continue to be part of the conversation. Brett says that deja vu will trigger you sometimes. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think that that's very common to have, or deja vu or just, memories of things. And deja vu is so strange because it's often, I think the deja vu is kind of in its own trigger because it's basically it's something sets off a memory or sets off an idea of an alternate reality or something like that. And sometimes there's no reason for that reaction or that memory or that feeling about things. And I think that that totally makes sense. I know that for myself, yeah, Brett says it's disassociating sometimes. Yeah, totally. I mean, I know that for myself, when I was going through some really heavy, hard stuff, I kept dreaming about different scenarios in that situation, and that was really difficult for me because I didn't want to work through those different scenarios, and instead I was doing them at night, which was not helpful. But through the work with my therapist, I really was able to kind of work through those things. So Angela says, you think routines are extremely important for those with a mental illness? Absolutely. I think that is super, super important. And you say that is why I encourage the clients that you work with to practice coping skills when you don't need them so that you remember them when you do. Absolutely, Angela. That is super, super key. And I'm going to mention some of my coping skills in a minute as far as what I did this weekend in order to try and work through things. But I agree. I think that it is very important to have these routines, these things that you know are going to help at least um, at least help you process things. I think that something that I talk about a lot on my mental health organization and on my podcast is the importance of holding space for your feelings and not always trying to process your feelings at the same time as you're holding them. And I will kind of like, I hope that that makes sense. But basically, the idea of, like, for example, right now in the pandemic, and everyone's kind of coming out of it, and there's anxiety, and there's so many things that everyone's kind of processing. I think that it's perfectly okay for someone to hold space for themselves to just feel shitty and to not necessarily have to figure out why that shitty feeling is happening. Like, it is okay to just feel your feelings and not try and psychoanalyze yourself at the same time. And sometimes I think that that can actually be a downside, because you might be jumping to conclusions about yourself that may not actually be true, that may be just because you're trying to like fix things right now in the moment, instead of just allowing yourself to sit in your current feeling and just kind of like allow all that to stay like that. Um, okay, a few things. Sarah says, not long ago, I had to explain to someone that they can be traumatized by something big or small, and then you can't compare your trauma with another person. Absolutely. That is super, super important to acknowledge. And I think that that's why it's really important to acknowledge the fact that like triggers literally could be like, I see a paper clip and that reminds me of something that is a really traumatic event, or brings up some kind of feeling of sadness or loss or grief or whatever. And of course, triggers can also, they could be a positive thing. We're of course just talking about them in the negative, but I mean, it could be something that like you see something and that makes you feel more happy or more hopeful. So that is a possibility as well. It's important to kind of look at both sides of those things, but thank you for speaking to that. Santiago says, I think when I finish work and on weekends and the city is calm and silent, being on your own is tough. Santiago, I completely understand. I went through a really horrible divorce a couple years ago, and I'm still processing things from that. And I think that personally being alone in the pandemic and having to kind of like sit in my own grief from my past years with this person was super important for me to like allow myself to feel these feelings for a prolonged period of time, like I was forced to with this, being at home and home quarantine stuff. So I empathize with you. Of course, I can't completely understand how you're feeling, but I empathize with you, and I will say that the alone time does get easier. I think it's just about like falling back in love with yourself and your own time and figuring out how that, just like how you like spending time by yourself and really trying to embrace that as much as possible. I know that sounds like kind of wishy-washy and whatever, but it truly has been a learning experience for me this past year, and I hope that you find some peace as well. Let's see. I don't know how to see your name, but your message says, hi, Deborah, thank you for this space. I struggle mainly with anxiety. For sure, a trigger in my case is having a few free days from work or the obligation of going out and then facing having to come back without finishing the endless pending tasks. Oh my goodness, you are speaking my language. I struggle with that all the time. I have way too many tasks on my plate. I am constantly overworking myself. And this honestly was one of the things that was contributing to my depression yesterday, Sunday being Easter Sunday, was that I still have a huge list of things that I need to do for work. And normally I work on the weekends, which I know is a bad habit of mine, but I do it and whatever. So normally I work on the weekends, but I just felt like I didn't want to yesterday. And so the entire day I was kind of struggling with the idea that I should be working, but I also didn't want to be working. But then I also was feeling like, why am I even taking the time off to not work when I'm just home and by myself, and like I should just be working anyways because I have nothing better to do. That was like my like endless loop yesterday, and I really tried to kind of acknowledge that and process that I was allowed to feel that way, and that I ended up not working. I ended up convincing myself to just like hold space for myself and not work for the day, but it was really, really difficult to work through that, and it just definitely was like an endless spiral I was kind of going down yesterday. Let me know if that at all resonates with you. And then so let's see. Leslie says, things like new music and movies can get a ton of anxiety because you don't know what random and seemingly mundane things will trigger you. Absolutely, Leslie. Oh my goodness, that is that I completely resonate with. I know that personally, that's why I often just stick with like comedies, because I know that the comedies are going to make me feel good. But then there's also times when like rom-coms I can't handle because of my past experiences with relationships. And I used to be like a rom-com fiend. I used to be obsessed with rom-coms and watch them all the time. And now sometimes I need space from them and I just can't. So I think that it's really important to kind of like know those things about yourself. Okay, so let's talk about, we've talked a lot about triggers, what they do, how they spiral yourself, etc. Now let's talk about what you can do about it, because I think that, as I said, how like when you're in a depressive state or in a depressive moment or you're feeling shitty or whatever, I do think that it's so important to give yourself space to just like process it, or to feel it and to not process it, to just like allow yourself the idea of like feeling your feelings, however you're feeling, allow those things to kind of roll over you, and just like be in that space. One thing that has been really helpful for me is, and this is something that my therapist gave me as a homework assignment last week. So, and this is what I did yesterday. So when I was going down when I was having my own triggers and going down my own depressive, feeling shitty path yesterday, I kind of remembered the homework assignment that my therapist gave me, and I was like, I think this is actually really going to help me right now. And so what her homework assignment was to write down the questions that were coming to my mind as far as my current situation, and then to write down how those questions were making me feel. Again, not process, not answer those questions, but just to look at those questions and then write down how they made me feel. So for example, one of my things yesterday when it came to feeling like I should be working and I wasn't, and feeling guilty for not working on the weekends, was, as I said previously, I'm an actor and a producer in Los Angeles, and being an actor is really difficult. And I was sitting there thinking about how I should be working on my career. Like maybe I wasn't going to do the other work that I needed to do, but maybe I should be working on my career. And so the questions came up as far as like, what's going to happen if I don't make it? How will I, show up for myself and relationships if I don't achieve what I want as far as my goals? What were some other questions I wrote down? Yeah, just like why am I not showing up for myself the way that I know that I can? So those were like questions that were coming up for me yesterday as I was trying to decide, like, am I gonna just watch TV and drink wine, or am I gonna try and like push through and do something for myself yesterday? So those were all sorts of questions that were coming up for myself. And instead of writing those questions down and actually answering them, I was writing those questions down and then answering how they made me feel. So for example, the question about like, why am I not showing up for myself more? I kind of wrote that down and then allowed myself to sit in it and go, okay, am I showing up for myself as much as I can? Like, I think that I am. So the question makes me sad that I feel that way about myself. So I wasn't actually answering the question. I was answering how that question made me feel, how that question itself was a trigger. And so I think that it's so important to kind of look at those sorts of things. And again, that goes back to like how you're relating to yourself. All of the questions that are coming up are related to how other people think about you. They don't necessarily have to do with how you think about yourself. And I think that that's really, key. And I hope that makes sense. But that was definitely something that really helped me yesterday. And I know that I basically yesterday ended up like getting a journal, going outside, because for me, like, nature is just like the perfect environment for me, going back to the importance of looking at your environment and how your environment relates to you. So I went outside, went and like was, I could hear birds chirping, I could see some flowers, and I started writing down these questions and how I was feeling about things. And then once I kind of processed that, I then made the decision about how I was going to spend the rest of my day. And I still felt shitty the rest of the day. As I said earlier in this conversation, I'm still not feeling great today. I still kind of feel depressed and listless and just not in a good headspace. But I allowed myself to kind of process things by like writing down some of those things. And then it basically allowed me to make a more informed decision about how I wanted to spend my time yesterday. So I hope that makes sense. I would love to hear how anyone else kind of like, what you do in order to process your triggers, whether it is, meditation, going for walks, drinking more water. I don't know. How do you process triggers? I'm very, very curious. So I definitely relate with the feeling of not doing what I'm supposed to do and then feeling bad about it. It's a complicated circle of guilt and shame over the most simple things. Absolutely. Yeah. And you are so welcome. You say, thank you for the idea of being aware of our struggles. For me, a big help has been to establish rules in your mind. For example, no alcohol. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say that I definitely am very lucky. Yeah, if alone or depressed, that's great. Definitely. I think that's really smart. So I can like kind of see, now I can see the comments a lot better. I'm not wearing my contacts today, guys. Yeah, I mean, I think that's really valuable. Thank you for sharing that. That's something that I kind of waver on a like almost daily basis, or not daily, I should say weekly basis, where I know that I don't have an addiction problem or anything like that, but I certainly do feel like sometimes I um, use alcohol as a crutch, and I know that that's a common trope, so I am not alone in that. But that definitely is something that I have thought about as well. So thank you for speaking to that. Bors says, or Land says, really struggling with guilt for my severe lack of motivation. Depression is a daily battle. Thank you so much for speaking to that. I think that that's really important to be vulnerable about. I would ask you, Lons, if you're like I spoke earlier, I don't know if you were here when I was talking about the 4 different aspects of our mental health, and all of the different things that impact our daily life and how we're feeling when we're feeling depressed or anxious. And so those 4 things very, very quickly are your social environment, who you surround yourself with, your physical environment, so like what you're actually surrounding yourself with, like your physical space, that also can be strongly impacted by the region that you live in, your greater community, stuff like that. Then also our physiology, how we talk about ourselves, and that has to do often with how our parents talked about themselves, how your parents talk to you. It can also relate to your DNA and to the DNA, like to the genetic ancestry of things. That also very much relates to it. And then your brain chemistry, so how your brain is actually like the levels of serotonin, the levels of testosterone and hormones, how all that relates. And then the 4th thing is your spirituality and how you're relating to a greater world, and all of that sort of stuff. And so I think that it's number 1, yeah, I would say, so you've given me more information, thank you. So you have BPD and CPTSD, struggling to leave the house, living very isolated, far from family, mental illness in the family. Yeah, thank you for speaking to that. And number 1, like, good for you for showing up here, because I think that it's so important to show up in a greater community. Like, when I'm talking about spirituality, I am also talking about communities like the Mighty, like what I have with More Than You See. I think that it's so important to address the fact that these greater communities can also be a part of our spirituality, and about like how we are relating to the world and to to the greater world around us. So I think that that's really, really key. I mean, I would say that I think that, obviously I'm not a therapist or a doctor. I think that it's really important to focus on the ideas of doing tiny little things, even if it is making your bed every day. Just starting with tiny little things that you can actually check off of your mental or physical to-do list, because those sorts of things will just kind of like get you into the mindset that you are achieving in some way. And I think that every tiny little thing that we do is such a huge thing to be celebrated. So I think that that's, important. I also think, I mean, you say that you're struggling with guilt because of your lack of motivation. And it's really, I'm sorry that you're feeling so much guilt around it. I certainly empathize and resonate with that idea, but I think it's also super important to recognize the fact that like you are allowed to feel however you're feeling. Like, you have full agency over your body, and however you're feeling, however you're relating to the world is perfectly okay. And if you aren't feeling like you're able to work right now or do something, it's so important to try and take away that guilt and give yourself extra grace, especially because we are all living through so much trauma right now. Like, I think that the impact that this past year has had on all of our mental health is going to be felt for a very long time. I don't think it's going to be something where like we just feel better after we're interacting in the world. I don't think that's the case. I think that there's going to be some long lasting, potentially generational trauma from this experience. And we are only at the tip of the iceberg as far as understanding all of that. So please, give yourself some like grace and self-love. And I would say, Lons, if it's at all helpful, my mental health podcast, called More Than You See, I genuinely feel like there is some really positive, wonderful things that have come out of that podcast. And I encourage you to check it out because it might be something that, just helps you a little bit with your own struggles. If you listen to the first episode, I discuss my own struggles with depression and feeling like struggling with suicidal thoughts, and I think that it's really important to speak openly about those things. And so my podcast, I really talk about that stuff. So, check it out if that's something that resonates with you. Niche says, you must say that the articles from the Mighty and Facebook support groups really help, even when you don't immediately realize, actually helped you to finally shower. Yes, that's amazing. That makes me so happy. I'm so glad that you brought that up. I mean, I think that this is exactly why I created More Than You See. And it's so funny because I actually had the Mighty as one of the resources on my mental health like webpage organization before they even approached me to come and talk to them, or to come and talk to you all like live, like we are right now. And the reason is because I do think that this space and all of the communities out there for mental health are so incredibly important. And again, we don't know what's going to be the thing that's going to pull us out of our dark times. I think that that's the key thing that I have learned throughout the last few years with my own struggles with mental health is the idea that it could be just like triggers can be bad things that can, spur you into a depressive state. Triggers like different non-traditional mental health resources, like I talk about on More Than You See, those things can trigger a positive change of mind and make you feel better about yourself in other ways. And so I think that it's so key to have our own little mental health toolbox of things that that are gonna make you feel better. Or potentially feel better, because again, it's so individual and it's also so situational. Like what might make you feel better today might make you feel worse next week. And that's why it's so important to kind of have a list or a bunch of different resources that make you feel better. And then you can kind of go back at them and go, okay, which of these things that do I think are going to make me feel better today, and try it, and then try something else. Like, I think that it's so important to recognize the fact that this is an ongoing journey, and we are all just like learning and growing together, but also by ourselves, because it is such an individual journey that we all kind of have to, work through. So Niche says, I felt an insane amount of guilt about self-care. It's been an issue for years. It even took years for my partner to understand. Sometimes, wonder why he's about to marry. Because you're amazing, Niche. That's why. That's all I have to say about that. You are worthy of love and of being with a wonderful, supportive partner. And I'm so happy that you have found that. So please, allow yourself to feel that I truly like what you have spoken about already. It just gives me some insight into who you are, and please remember that you're wonderful. So I think that it's self-care is the hardest thing for most of us, and it is also the thing that's the most important, and that's really tough. I think that, I mean, I was going to say, like, I think something that helps me, but I have to admit, like, this is still something that I struggle with daily. And I know that oftentimes my depressive spirals are directly related to the fact that I'm not allowing myself to give myself more self-care. So I hear you. I do think that it's just really important, you know, to acknowledge the fact that it's difficult for everyone. And if it's feeling difficult today, that's okay. Like, self-care does not have to be whatever society thinks self-care is. Society or self-care can be, going for a walk. It could be whatever makes you feel better is a form of self-care. And I think that sometimes we have these ideas that, like, oh, I'm failing at self-care because I'm not doing it the way that someone else told me that I should self-care. And that's bullshit. Like, you should self-care the way that you self-care, period. And for me, I know that, like, walking outside with my dog every day for at least 30 minutes, usually an hour, is something that makes me feel better, period. And for me, that is self-care. But a lot of times I think, like, oh man, I'm not self-caring in the correct way. And no, that's wrong. Like, it just self-care how you need to self-care, and that's it. And just, again, you're awesome, Niche. Please hold that and remember that. Okay, we're gonna wrap up here. And so Bors says, you're so insightful. Oh, thank you. This is a big help. Mighty has been a big help since the Syrian war. Yeah, I mean, I thank you for speaking to that, Bors. I mean, it's, I am so blessed in the fact that I have not, gone through that kind of trauma, but I think that there is so much, it's so important to provide support and extra care for people who have gone through hugely traumatic events, like that. And so thank you for speaking to that. And I'm so glad that the Mighty is continuing to be a good resource for you. That's really, really awesome. Rick says that he spent time with the turtles today while you clean the tank. Good job. That's awesome. And Oias, nice to see you. You said sometimes conformity is not good for us. Absolutely. I mean, I think that it's really important to, again, be individual with our self-care, be individual with all of those sorts of things. I think that's really, really important. So Angela asked, what happens to tools and resources? I mean, this is the thing. I brought up the fact that to this weekend, the tool and resource that I used was writing down questions about why I was feeling depressed, why I was feeling triggered. And then I wrote down how those questions made me feel. That is a form of a tool. And I think that it's so important to acknowledge that sometimes these tools and resources can be kind of, what's it called? Innocuous. Like, we don't even think of what they are, or we don't even completely acknowledge and know what a tool and resource is. It's just like, whatever is the thing that kind of like helps us process. That is a tool and resource. And I think that that's really, really key. So I've got about a minute and 30 seconds, and then we're going to get cut off. So I want to thank everyone again for being part of my conversation today. Again, please check out my podcast called More Than You See. I discuss all sorts of different topics on there. You can obviously see what the topics are. If you go to the episodes, you can choose an episode that you want to listen to or listen to them all. They're short. They're like 15 to 17 minutes because I really wanted to make sure that that they're bite-sized for you all, so you can kind of listen to them and process them. Please, share it with your friends, subscribe, rate, review, all those usual things that everyone asks. Santiago, thank you so much for being here. I really, really appreciate it, and I just love, I love being part of this community, even when I'm not feeling my best. Please follow More Than You See on Instagram. I am who runs that Instagram. So if there's ever, if you want to share your own stories or resources or anything like that, you can find me right there. I will always respond to things, and I just love being part of this community. So I really, really appreciate you all. Please, give yourself a lot of self-love this week. The holidays are hard, and that's okay. And I look forward to seeing you guys in 2 weeks right here, Monday, 1 p.m. I will see you then.